Before we undertake the topic of today, let me welcome you and open up so that this topic may equip us with the knowledge that we need. Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. I'm Jessica Kalombo, your host. Today we will be talking about the African history, our own history. And on board we have Mr. Ismail Akwei, who will be elaborating some more on this topic and at the same time give us a point of view and give us some of the details that had been taking place among and within our African nations in a way to unite Africa and unite our nations. Let us all welcome him as we will be listening to him on this part one of the African history.
Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. I hope that those who will be watching this documentary will have actually a bit of your point of view regarding our African history. And not taking too long, I would like for you to also introduce yourself so that our viewers may have at least an idea of who you are and what you're doing.
Yes, I'm Ismail Akwei, and I'm a broadcast and digital journalist in Accra, Ghana. I'm also the editor-in-chief of Africa Web. So the Africa Web is a group that consists of GhanaWeb.com, CameroonWeb.com, TanzaniaWeb.com, and MyNigeria.com. So all of these are country-specific portals in all these countries I've mentioned. And we publish a lot of news and information to these African audiences, and we are expanding to other places. So that's what I do. I'm also a lover of history, and I love photography. I also love African art and also culture. So I read wide about these things. I also experience them. I purchase some. I also teach some days voluntarily and do other things as well.
Wow, thank you so much. That's beautiful. That's beautiful to meet up with actually our own, because this channel, it is actually just in a way for us to hear from our own African people, to learn from our own African people in a way to promote the African values. And so just speaking of the knowledge that you have gained through some of the experiences that you had undertaken, would you say that the current history that is among or within the African nations, is it the correct historical knowledge that we should be equipped with, or is there any other knowledge that African people should maybe research and found?
Well, I would want to start from the beginning. African history. How has African history been put together? We all know African history majorly was oral, and we, unfortunately for us, we had the Europeans, the colonizers, putting together our own history for us, and definitely they left some out. And thankfully, we had some professors who, in the early 1920s, started putting together oral history for us to have the other side of the story. When it comes to knowledge about Africa, we are a bit not equipped with all of it. Our school curriculum is following the Western educational curriculum. The standards are really not African, and we get only a fraction of African history taught in our schools. The children grow and know nothing about their history and culture. We know nothing but what the white people want us to know, what the Westerners, the colonizers want us to know. And these books that we study in schools have been written long ago. Some have been written in 1950s when other African countries were gaining independence. And in Ghana, for instance, where I am, Kwame Nkrumah, when Ghana gained independence in 1957, tried to change the curriculum. He brought in new books to talk about the history of other African countries like the Southern Africa, like Eastern Africa and other places. But today, these educational curriculum have been changed because we are getting funding from Western countries and donors who also want to tap into how the education is supposed to go. With this, you realize that we are teaching kids about homosexuality, Kids are being taught about Western values and culture and all these things. We are learning about Latin historians. We are learning about Greeks and all these people. However, when you ask any child, even in Ghana, stop any child in the street and ask him, does he know anything about Southern Africa or even South Africa, Namibia, any of the countries down there? They know nothing about it because the history hasn't been brought together. So whenever we talk about unity, that unity is not there in all facets of the life of an African, from the history, from the knowledge, the culture, to even politics, economics, all of it. We are really, really at a disadvantage, and unfortunately, the children are not learning anything because of the policies that have been put in place that's supposed to improve the educational sector.
Wow, thank you so much. That's so true. Most of the things that you said now is so true. Even myself, if you were to ask me a few questions about other countries within Africa, I have no clue of what they're living or what they're experiencing, even the history of Africa in general. I am clueless of it. And this is the kind of knowledge that we need to research, especially as African people, in a way to unite Africa as one continent. So speaking of that knowledge, because currently we have majority of people speaking of consciousness. You know, I want to be conscious. I want to be conscious. There's so many things that
Yeah.
are called under consciousness. Would you say that the knowledge that we need as African people, it is also part of consciousness, or is consciousness something totally different from us having to know our past and our present in a way to prepare maybe for our future?
Without knowledge, there wouldn't be any consciousness. And if you look at the current state of Africans who are saying they are more conscious about their own history, their own background, you realize that these are people who have read independently. And it's not that they got to know or they met the information out there openly, because the information is not there. There are two groups of people who are supposed to drive culture and history. One is those in authority, the policymakers, because it's through policies that you'd have education or the educational institutions getting or bringing on board certain historical information that will be used to educate children. The second is the media. Unfortunately, the media in Africa is a big failure, including even my media, because we do little of information concerning our own history and our own culture in line. What about bringing up African values, African information systems that is going to get people to be hooked up onto African culture and history. And that's what's going to bring the consciousness of the African. So there's supposed to be African consciousness. Unfortunately, the African consciousness is not there. If you look at the US, for instance, they have black consciousness and they are using this to fight against racism and also discrimination against the blacks. So you realize that there's certain media houses, from TV stations to online platforms, which push that black consciousness agenda. By pushing the agenda, it means they are always talking about black empowerment, talking about black people who have achieved and all these things. Imagine African media doing this. Imagine we have a centralized media where, let's say, all the state institutions, state media institutions in the countries of Africa are pushing all these stories about their black leaders, about the achievements that we've done, about all these good stuff. That's a lot of content that's going to get people to be conscious of their own strength and our own abilities, and we could go beyond what our forefathers have done. Unfortunately, we're only seeing white consciousness, we're only seeing Western consciousness. Let me use that. And even people can tell you more about Black Lives Matter, and they will forget about the struggle for independence in their own countries. They didn't even know people struggled for independence. And the issues that they face or we faced in the past are the same issues we are facing right now. If you go to South Africa, the issues that were faced before are the same issues, just that the people who are acting in these capacities have been changed. But the people, the young ones who are the majority of the populations of African countries, do not get the direct or do not know their history. In Ghana, we have something called Sankofa. It's an Anakan adage, which means go back and then check your history so it would help you shape up your future. And if the history is missing, it's not there, then what do we use to shape up our future? What do we use to see if we are on the right tracks or not? There's nothing to measure with. So the consciousness is really not there.
I think I'm very glad that we came to actually set this interview because I'm learning a lot from you. So, saying with all that you just said, where do you see Africa in 10 years from now?
Well, unfortunately, Africa in 10 years is going to be the digital Africa, which we all know. Unfortunately, Africa has been mixed up with so many other cultures, and you cannot distinguish between African culture now and the Western culture because we claim we are modernizing everything. The kids are only seeing a lot of the Western culture, and they're not seeing or going back to the roots of the African culture. And those who are the those who are holding on to the culture, those who are supposed to propagate our African culture, unfortunately, are not doing that. These are the chiefs and the traditional leaders that we have. They are the ones who are the embodiments of our culture. And they are not doing that because they've also been westernized. So Africa in 10 years is going to be an Africa where our culture wouldn't matter much because we are going with the global culture. And it's going to be an Africa where those who know about the culture will be they'll be in the minimum. Only a few people will be interested in the African culture, and you would find people in other continents saying they know the African culture better than the Africans, because you realize that in some universities, in University of Ghana, for instance, we have the Department of African Studies, and this department is supposed to drive the entire African information, the entire African cultural and historical information to the people. But go to that department and you see that only a few people are studying at the department. Only a few people. Why are the others not selecting or choosing to study African history? And some of these universities have tried to make the study of African history and culture compulsory. So these are like there are some courses which you need to take compulsorily because you need to know. However, if we don't make it a widespread policy that people should learn more about their culture to be conscious of the African history and culture, we would end up losing a lot of these kids to other cultures which are not ours. And some of these cultures could be in the line of even work, in the line of language, in the way we dress, the way we eat, and everything has changed. We don't eat African anymore. We don't dress African anymore. We don't even think African anymore. And the only description of African mentality now is a negative. The moment someone does something bad, they say, yes, that's the African mentality. That's the African, the African attitude. But if it's good, then it's normal. That's like global. That's okay. And that's also bad. We are discriminating against ourselves, our own selves. We are pushing ourselves down to the bottom, and we would have a difficult time getting out of it as Africans.
Thank you so much to all of you for having the opportunity to hear of a bit on our African history, and especially the knowledge that we need to research and find as African people, and also understanding what is it that we speak of consciousness. Which kind of consciousness do we need as African people to adapt in a way to rebuild our people, to rebuild our Africa without having to separate and divide ourselves due to the lack of the knowledge that we need to all be equipped with in a way to bring again that unity. Thank you so much again, Mr. Ismail Akwei, for the details that you have shared with us and the wisdom that you have shared with us. And for all those who have watched this video, if you love the topic and you would like to hear some more, don't forget to subscribe and like, and also share with others so that we may create awareness among our continent and also educate our nations. Until then, bye bye.